Allow me to introduce myself. I represent the Rent is Too Damn High party.
In 2005, a man named Jimmy McMillan famously ran for mayor of New York City under a single platform: the rent is too damn high. Candidates for elected office in Asheville would probably find a lot of traction with that issue today. Just in the past 2 years, residential rents have gone up 36%.
Why do we still have a housing crisis, even though we've had a boom, not just in house building, but also apartment building, is because these sellers, or people who are the landlords, are able to bring the prices up. They're getting away with it. The market does it. There's enough people that will pay that money.
I'm Matt Peiken. My guest today on The Overlook is Joel Burgess of the Asheville Citizen-Times. We talk through his recent coverage of Asheville's rental market, the forces that limit the power of local officials to directly address the issue, and the creative methods some in local government are coming up with to try keeping Asheville affordable and livable. Erin Fowler is a commercial photographer. You can find her on Instagram as Scraps of Lace. She specializes in photographing couples and has a real knack for capturing just the right scenes at weddings. But she also takes on the role of event planner. Say you come to Erin wanting engagement photos. On the day of the shoot, Erin could bring you to a vineyard.
We might set up a day of them playing games because they love to just play together. Or if they like nature more, then maybe we're doing a hike and then we're finding a place like a covered bridge to like set up their games, and they're sitting there and they're having some drinks and playing their games and including that in their special day because that's something they love to do all the time.
Erin also prepares for the unexpected.
Like I have an emergency kit, and in it I have first aid stuff, I have fleece lined leggings, I have sunscreen, I have like all the things.
So if you want a photographer who sees more than what shows up through her lens, look up Erin Fowler at scrapsoflacephotography.com or on Instagram as Scraps of Lace. Joel Burgess has been a staff writer at the Citizen-Times for more than 20 years. I began our conversation by asking him what he paid for rent when he first arrived.
First, it was free because I was on my friend's couch until he was done with that. And then I was paid like $100 a month. And I had a tiny little room. I had 2 roommates. They were women, so they're very neat. One of them had to walk through my room to get to the bathroom. That was okay.
But you still had 2 roommates, though.
Yeah, I had 2 roommates, but $100 a month.
Yeah.
And that was on Emma Road. And then I was living in West Asheville on Vermont before West Asheville was anything. And I was probably paying it was less than $300. I had 1 roommate, less than $300.
Crazy.
Yeah.
The most recent article you had, you wrote that rents are up 36% in less than 2 years. And I was wondering, is it an apt analogy to compare it to like compounding interest with investments? The rent increases that we were seeing even like 3-4 years ago, they weren't going up that rapidly.
Compounding, that's interesting. Yeah, there probably is a compound. It's more of a psychological effect. People hear about Asheville, they want to move to Asheville. The landlords feel they can increase the rent. People begin to expect that higher rent. You hear stories of people whose landlords tell them, I'm going to increase the rent, and they ask why. Is there a repair that needs to be made or some other issue? And the landlord says, no, everyone else is increasing the rent. So it feels opportunistic.
Do we have a low vacancy rate for rentals?
Yes, we have a very low vacancy rate. We have a low turnover rate. We have, and I think you may have seen in this story, again, it's on our website, citizen-times.com, you may have seen that we have more than 20 people for each open apartment.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because when people think about competition for real estate, we think about buyers. Are similar things happening in the rental market where people are coming in and offering more than the asking price on a rental?
I have not heard that. I do not think that's generally how it works. I've never heard of that kind of haggling, let's say, go on with rentals. Now, that's with large commercial renters, though I would bet that, again, hypothesis, that it is happening with just single landlords, right, that have a house.
I'm just wondering, when you have a competition, you have 20 people applying for an apartment, how does the landlord or the owner of that property decide who to give it to? It's not first come, first served necessarily, right? First person to complete an application.
I think it has a lot to do with that. And then it also has to do with the large commercial apartment owners, and also probably some smaller landlords are doing this too, where they require proof of income. They want to see that you make 3 times the rent. They want to know that you can pay this. And I've talked to renters that have fibbed on that. Single moms, a couple kids, they don't know what to do.
Sure.
But the larger apartment complex owners will make you show it. So I would imagine that has more to do with your ability to show that, probably some rental history, probably your credit, probably a lot of other personal information you have to share. Maybe, as I said, with some individual landlords, you might have some bidding, though I still don't,
I'm
it's
surprised
not quite that market.
Yeah, I'm surprised with that kind of competition that there wouldn't be, if it's legal, why there wouldn't be, you're asking $1,500 for an apartment, somebody comes in and says, I'll give you $1,600.
I also think that we're talking about different economic strata. I think that when we talk about buyers and pushing up housing prices, the pandemic has showed us that people are now not tethered to a place. Many people, right? You can move your job. So folks are coming in with California money, and they can offer cash for more than the asking price easily. But I don't think most renters are in that situation. I think when a person comes to town, if they've got that kind of cash, they're likely not looking to rent. If you're going to spend the money, typically, unless interest rates keep going up, we're told that it's a better investment.
The only thing I can imagine where that population would overlap are people coming in with money who don't know where they want to buy yet, and they're getting a lay of the land. You wrote about a complex that's approved in just south of downtown, and 221 unit complex. I guess there are some 60 some odd units that are designated for affordable housing. I thought this was unusual in the sense of that any development that comes in offering a certain percentage of affordable housing, it's purely voluntary on the part of the developer, correct?
It's always important to talk to people about this because we have, again, so many people from other states that are moving here. State laws are different. North Carolina does not have what we call inclusionary zoning, which is what you're getting at.
Yeah.
Meaning that in some states, some municipalities, the developer comes and says, I want to do this. And they say, okay, you've got to fulfill this inclusionary zoning clause that says this percentage has to be affordable. Not true in North Carolina. So you're right, it is voluntary. Typically how it happens, what Asheville has been doing, the city has been offering what they call grants. They give people tax breaks. They say, look, you build this percentage of affordable housing and we will give it back to you in the form of a grant, a certain number of years, and you've got to hold it a certain number of years. And it has to be, and they market for certain incomes. We usually talk about area median incomes. This is different in that the city was the landowner. So this was land that was south of downtown. It used to be Matthews Ford for people who've been around long enough. It's now right next to this new entrance for what is the old Lee Walker Heights. Maple Crest is what it's called now.
Okay.
And the idea had been originally after Matthews Ford, Duke wanted to make a substation out of it. But the city saw an opportunity also with where it was. And so they got it from Duke. The city bought it for 5.3, which was actually under market. So it was a pretty good deal. And then after Lee Walker Heights got rebuilt, the oldest public housing complex in Asheville, they said, okay, now that we're the landowner, this is, instead of giving them a tax rebate, we're going to find the right developer and just give them the land.
Right, and that's a rare opportunity for the city, right?
Correct.
In terms of city-owned land.
It ticks off a lot of boxes that are checks off a lot of boxes that are very important in terms of trying to make housing make sense. It's near a major corridor. It's near the hospital. It's near jobs. It's near public transportation. Near a lot of services, also city services. And boom, lo and behold, it's already flat, a lot of it.
It's such a stark situation when we're looking at a development like this and looking at 60 some odd units of affordable housing and championing a yay, and yet it's just double digits. And the needs in this town are multitudes of that. Do you get a sense of people who were able to afford rent before and are not able to afford the average rent now? What's happening to these people?
I've got neighbors like that. And sadly enough, one of them moved out of town back to live with her parents in South Carolina. Longtime Asheville resident. I won't name her, don't have her permission, but somebody who was smart and knowledgeable, worked in a bookstore. A lot of people knew her. She can't make it here anymore. Another guy works at a good restaurant, waitstaff. Basically what's happened is the landlord is aged out to the point that she can't manage it anymore, and the children decided they wanted to sell it. And so this other guy, he's looked around and he said, I guess as of April, I'll be moving to Minnesota where I have friends and there's a couch I can sleep on.
And Minnesota is also, from your reporting, one of the only 6 states that allows for rent control ordinances. And I found that kind of interesting when I moved here from Minnesota, where I was just used to that being the case, that there were certain mechanisms in place to impose rent controls. Why is the North Carolina legislature, from what you've been able to tell, why is there such resistance to rent controls here, or at least allowing municipalities to have the leverage, if needed, to impose that?
I won't be telling folks that have lived here a long time anything new. The state has always been moderate to moderately conservative. Let's say in the last century, Democrats controlled the General Assembly, but these were very much centrist Democrats, favored property rights, spent a lot of money on education, but really weren't thinking about taking any steps that they saw as radical in terms of ensuring affordable housing. And honestly, the problem wasn't as acute back then. Fast forward to 2010, the Republicans take over the General Assembly for the first time since Reconstruction, and there is very little appetite among Republicans right now for adjusting to these types of things. There are economists, even ones that are not considered conservative, that say rent controls can actually hurt in terms of prices long term. So it's very easy for a Republican legislator to turn to that and say, look, I'm not going to do this. It's going to make things worse. But the bill that I'm not sure.
Senate Bill 225.
225, thank you, which is sponsored in part by Julie Mayfield from Asheville. Her point is that they need a lot of solutions. They need a lot of tools. And I think even the economists that say, look, this might be a problem long term, acknowledge that short term, yeah, you could stabilize things. I think that's the point of the sponsors, is there needs to be a little stability for people, because right now, if you aren't the folks coming in with the California money, buying the houses, you're the ones scrabbling, trying to find the rent, you don't have a lot of stability. And that doesn't help in terms of, let's say you want to look at it from an employer standpoint. In terms of workforce, it really hurts.
Want to see some fantastic theater for free? There are 4 remaining productions on the Magnetic Theater's 2023 calendar, and we're randomly giving away 2 pairs of tickets to each of them. Just sign up for the Overlook's weekly newsletter. Anyone subscribed by the end of April is eligible. Go to podavl.com, that's podavl.com, and scroll to the bottom of the homepage. Plug in your name and email address on the newsletter sign-up form, and you might become a new fan of the Magnetic Theater thanks to the Overlook. Some critics of rent control say these controls actually hurt the rental market. I asked Joel Burgess to detail those arguments.
Put simply, the argument is that it depresses the increase, let's say. It reduces any sort of increase in supply that you might have had without rent controls, when a developer could say, hey, I can charge whatever I want. I want to build this.
It disincentivizes
Correct.
developers from adding apartments. But yet you would think that, okay, they might not make as much money every month, but they would still be making money. These legislators who are opposed to any kind of rent control, are they in districts that are impervious to the needs of people at the lower economic spectrum?
A lot of them are from rural areas where rent is not going to be the biggest problem that poorer folks are facing, rent prices. Some of them, though, Bill Rabin, who's in charge of the Rules Committee, where this bill just might languish and die, is from coastal North Carolina, and they are definitely experiencing high land prices. We have seen this General Assembly shift. We just had a vote to expand Medicaid. It took a decade since Obamacare, but they did it. So who knows? Maybe they'll see it. It's been termed a crisis. One person I interviewed who has a pretty good handle on it is City Council member Sage Turner. And her point is, when I said, look, economists say you do this, it will, and I'm going to use your term, which I thought was good, de-incentivize the creation of affordable housing. And she said, we have a housing boom. We also have a housing crisis.
I was going to ask you about that. I saw that you quoted Sage in your story about that. And let's pull that string a little bit. How do we have a housing boom at the same time as having affordability crisis?
Excellent question. So obviously there needs to be more reporting on that. And when we talk about housing boom, we're talking about not just homes being built, but also apartments being built. So there's been a lot of apartments that have been built also. What you were getting at about why do we still have a housing crisis, even though we've had a boom, not just in house building, but also apartment building, is because these sellers or renters, people who are the landlords, are able to bring the prices up. They're getting away with it. The market does it. There's enough people that will pay that money. At least with the apartments, it seems like they're going to hit some kind of ceiling with that, though.
I was just going to ask you about that. Where does this end? And are there any parts of Asheville that you can see that are if not immune to this, but that are not having this kind of mushrooming price in the same way that other areas are?
Wow. No, I don't. Really? Looking around, if you mean within city limits?
Yeah.
No, and the realtors and builders have probably beat you to it if there were, and then it's changed. One place that I've been following with some fascination is Woodfin. Woodfin is actually, it's a town. So the question is, here's this sort of odd little collection of neighborhoods on the north side of Asheville. Why was it even a town? Really, it was they incorporated out of fear of being annexed. They just didn't want to be Asheville. And then really what they wanted was not many regulations, be left alone, low taxes. So that's what happened. But then as people that moved to the area and wanted to live in Asheville could not afford it, they moved to Woodfin. And so slowly we're seeing Woodfin really become a little bit more like Asheville, maybe a lot more like Asheville, where residents look around and go, why don't we have regulations against building on steep slopes? Why don't we have regulations against this? Why don't we have this kind of service? Because nobody wanted to pay taxes for it. So I have a feeling that we just saw 3 new people elected to the Woodfin Town Board, and I think it looks like there might be some competition for the mayor's race. And
from what I understand, this is the first competitive mayor's race in quite some time. Right?
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Are you covering that as well?
I might end up covering bits of it too, just out of interest. I've had friends even that went through this process of looking for homes in Asheville. I end up in Woodfin.
Stephanie Monson-Dahl at the city planner, she told me that Woodfin is the fastest growing region in this immediate area. One thing I wanted to ask you about is how the short-term rental market is affecting our rental prices. And you touched on this in a recent story that while Airbnbs in Asheville, as a homeowner, you have to actually live on the property to be able to rent out any of it as a short-term rental. Yet at the same time, there are other developments that are advertised just as short-term rentals. I think of those units over by New Belgium that they advertise. It says short-term rentals on the building. In
order to meet the new city rules, the new city ordinances, they would have to rent for at least a month. So it would be a month to month. So that would be their short term. So 30 days is basically the sweet spot. And because the city did ban them. They banned any new short-term vacation rentals. Some got grandfathered in. They've been around long enough. If they were paying their fees, they were okay. Most of the new ones, in the traditional sense, I think that you will see, in other words, homes converted. People were living in a home, they converted it, I think are going to be just outside city limits because in most places there aren't rules. The county really doesn't have many rules about it, many restrictions.
So like in Woodfin, technically you could have that.
Woodfin is actually talking about regulating them now. And so again, it's what I told you is where, people are moving in saying, why don't we have rules against this? Look, I think this might happen now. They actually did have a discussion about it about a decade ago. And what they came down to, I think they were leaning toward homestays, but I think in the end they allowed, and homestays are what you were referring to, where either the owner or another long-term resident, it could be a renter,
yes,
has to be there while people are staying there. So it's truly a shared facility. So yes, Woodfin again is looking, I think we may see a clampdown on Woodfin.
Are there pressures now within Asheville and from developers and property owners saying, hey, look, why can't we do with our properties what we want when neighbors just 5 miles down the road, 10 miles down the road can do that?
It was a very interesting conversation back in, I think it really came to a head about 2014 or 15, where people had Airbnbs for a while, and the way the city dealt with them is they would leave them, they technically were not legal, but and they'd leave them alone unless somebody complained. People started to complain. And I think what happened is a lot of noise, parties, and then the real thing that I think started to turn the tide is people realized that they didn't have neighbors anymore. A lot of people moved to Asheville because you like the neighborhoods. You want to have neighbors. You want to interact with people. You want to feel like you're part of a community. It doesn't really happen if your street gets filled up with really de facto hotels,
right,
is what we're talking about. And so there might be some envy in terms of making money, right?
That's where I think it all is.
But then there's this trade. People I think have, especially that have experienced it in Asheville, realize the trade-off. They say, gee, I'd like to be able to make the money, but if I do it, is everyone else going to do it? And then am I going to be living basically in a hotel district?
Is the short-term market, and what you're saying, that the short-term market to be legal where there isn't a primary resident on the premises, it has to be a month or longer.
Correct.
If somebody's there. Is there enough of a market for that here in Asheville that's having a tangible effect on the rental market for residents?
I would guess yes. I would guess that every bit helps or hurts, depending on which way it goes. And I think that the housing problem is dire enough in Asheville that any rental that goes off the market and displaces people is going to have ripple effects. And I've talked to people where it's happened. A lot of times it typically happens when you have an apartment or a house that's sold, a long-term owner that maybe passes away, and then the new owner takes some steps, raises costs. I know Weaverville, for example, does not have very many restrictions, if any, on vacation rentals. Often, we just call them Airbnbs, right? Everyone does.
It's a euphemism at this point.
There was a real story about people that had lived in a duplex for decades and had a spot and was stable. They could work in the service industry, and then it was bought, turned into Airbnb. I think as long as that much money can be made off of them, it's very difficult to prevent it. So that's where the restrictions, the rules come in. I haven't heard the kind of pressure from residents in Asheville recently. The fight was very loud back in the sort of late teens, as I would say. But I feel like it's been resolved, and I think people understand that there's a ban now, and it's not a whole lot of pushback.
I just wonder if, like everything that happens and handcuffs city officials from being able to do certain things, if the state legislature will come out with some law that says uniformly in North Carolina, you cannot ban property owners from Airbnb-ing their properties.
It's been proposed, and it's been out there, and I think it's gotten through a few committees, and I'm going to say the reason that it hasn't become a statewide law is because you also have some very wealthy landowners that don't want it to happen.
Oh.
And so they say, ooh, no, maybe not. Of course, if you live in a place that has restrictive covenants, you could work that out yourself, but not always. Or maybe you live in a more rural area.
So getting back to Senate Bill 225, even Julie Mayfield, you quoted her as saying the chances were slim to none that would pass. Is there anything on the horizon, any proposal, anything you've heard about that you think politically might get some traction that could cross the aisle to Republican support?
I talked about quoting Sage Turner, the city council member, and she had an interesting idea that she put forward. So the way the city has dealt with having a lot of local power. So real quick, counties and municipalities in North Carolina don't have home rule. They've got very little control in terms of taxation and land use. They can zone, they can raise property taxes. They can't do inclusionary zoning, which we talked about, which is requiring affordable housing, for example. They can't do rent controls. They can't, when they do property taxes, it's got to be a flat rate. So Asheville's gotten pretty creative. And one way, and Buncombe County did this too, one way they dealt with it is with the last couple of tax years, they offered grants basically to people that fell within certain income ranges and essentially gave them back part of their taxes. So really what they did is create a graduated property tax. You see what I'm saying?
Wait, you said graduated rate for the property owner?
Property owner, that's right.
Okay.
By giving back to poorer property owners, less well-off property owners, just giving them back in what they called a grant. So you hear this, what I'm talking about, a creative way to get some local control. And the reason I'm telling this is because Sage Turner brought this up also. She, as an analogy, pointed to what the city is doing with hotels. So the city can't ban hotels. They can't ban new hotels. State law would not allow it.
We did have a moratorium for a year.
Moratorium, which is not, it's a temporary ban.
You have a moratorium for a decade or something?
The city went to the state Supreme Court to try to stop a hotel from being built on the grounds of the old sheriff's office on Haywood Street, overlooking the interstate. You can see Montford. They lost. And many would argue is really just political performance because they were just trying to show the residents, look, we're trying, but in this state, good luck. So what they decided to do after the moratorium is say, look, hoteliers, you have to come to us if you want. You've got to go through this long process because you're a hotel and you have to come before the city council to get approved. You got to do this real song and dance. You can avoid coming to the city council if you will pick some public benefits from this menu that we provided and fulfill them. And then you can just get approved by staff. You don't have to face us. And so many hotels say, yes, I will give money to affordable housing. I will give money to the reparations fund. I will pay a living wage. And so they check off the boxes, they avoid it. Now, Sage Turner's idea was, maybe for people that are coming in to build new apartments, we do the same thing and say, will you control the rents? Will you volunteer to control the rents? And that way the city isn't technically imposing it. The city is offering it as a way for them to fast track their approval.
It's another kind of incentive. As Stephanie Munson-Dahl said, that there are things you could do with taxes, and this is a similar kind of incentive, right?
Right. It's the carrot rather than the stick. That was an interesting idea from Turner. I don't know if they even need state permission to do that. So that's a possibility. They could move forward even with something like that. And I also think that the concept of the city offering large apartment developers this fast track in exchange for public benefits, I think that's already in the works. And so what that could mean is making it easier for some people to become renters. One of it might be maybe just like now they're saying, hey, if you will include some affordable housing, then again, you don't have to get approved by us. The staff will do it. It's much less painful. So that's the incentive for a developer.
And talk, I guess I wasn't quite following how that graduated tax according to property value, how does that come back to benefit affordability on rent?
Here's how. It would certainly benefit people who are just trying to stay in their homes. Let's say somebody who's owned their home for a long time and maybe taxes are going up, maybe costs in general are going up. So this benefits the landowner. Maybe they're also a landlord, right? Maybe they are renting out a room long term.
So it's a ripple effect benefit to rental.
Yeah.
I was just wondering about the connection.
That was primarily just a way to give poor local property owners a break, a way to get around the idea that the state does not allow, and it's only, you would say, one step of graduation, right? Graduated property tax. And so what I was using it for was just to illustrate how the city's been pretty creative, actually, in ways to figure this out. I was impressed. I was like, oh, I see what you're doing. They make sure not to call it that. It's a grant. It's not a graduated tax rate, or it's an incentive. It's not punitive in any way.
I want to thank my guest today, Joel Burgess of the Asheville Citizen-Times. If you have thoughts about today's topic, I'd love to hear them and maybe pull them into a future episode of The Overlook. Just leave a voice message on our recorded line, 984-278-7301. Our theme music for The Overlook, Maker's Song, comes courtesy of the Asheville band The Resonant Rogues. The Overlook is a production of Podcast Asheville. Don't forget, we're giving away 2 pairs of tickets to the rest of the Magnetic Theater's productions for 2023. To be eligible, just sign up for our weekly newsletter at podavl.com. Also, please vote for The Overlook as Best Podcast and for me as your favorite radio host in Mountain Express's Best of WNC survey. I'm Matt Peiken, and I'll see you on the next episode of The Overlook.